Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who's not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled master, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is a slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us to put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. Ameen. We're continuing in the book, the Hadrami Introduction, Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, which was written by the Allama Bafadl, may Allah have mercy on him. This book is an introductory text into the fiqh of the Shafi'i madhab. We've arrived in the book to page 18. We've arrived in the book to page 18 at the start of the chapter entitled Conditions of Tayammum. So we've been talking for the last couple classes on the topic of tayammum. It's important for a person to know these rules of tayammum. Even though it's not very common that you need to make tayammum, these rules are important. And it's important for you to know in your heart that you don't need to go look it up, okay? Because you never know when you're in a situation where you need to make tayammum. And you may not have your books with you when that situation comes. Okay, so this is something you want to keep in your heart so that you can apply this knowledge at the time that you need to apply it. Also, it's because there are other chapters of fiqh that refer back to this. There are other chapters of fiqh that simply say, if your hardship is so severe that it would permit tayammum, well then, such and such and such and such would be the ruling. So if you don't understand these rules of tayammum, when you're allowed to resort to tayammum and when you're not, then that means you're going to have difficulty understanding other chapters of fiqh as well. So let's go into it. Page 18. Conditions of tayammum. It says the conditions of tayammum are 10. So what we're going to mention here are the 10 conditions, meaning the things that must be true in order for your tayammum to be valid. After that, we're going to talk about the obligations of tayammum. Okay, these things also have to be done properly for the tayammum to be valid. The difference is that the obligations pertain to performing the act of tayammum, and these conditions don't pertain to the act itself, rather they pertain to other matters. So let's go through the 10 conditions, insha'Allah ta'ala. Number 1 says that it is performed with earth. Okay, so among the conditions of tayammum is that you have to use soil. You have to use, the actual earth, the soil, the dirt. Okay, this is what tayammum is made with. Okay, so you should understand from this that it is not permissible for a person to make tayammum with a rock. Okay, even if he smacked the rock and even if dust from the rock got on his hand, a rock according to the Shafi'i madhab, is not considered to be soil. Okay. Um, the way the Shafi'is understand the word Sa'id in the Quran is that it refers to soil. Okay. There are other madhabs who have different interpretations of the word. But in the Shafi'i madhab, tayammum can only be done with soil. This means you cannot do it with rocks. You cannot do it with, you know, other things that I've seen people claim that they're making tayammum with. Some people will pat their hands up against the wall because there's dust on the wall. They'll say, oh, I'm making tayammum. I've seen people on airplanes pat their hand against the back of the seat in front of them and say they're making tayammum. Okay, none of this is valid according to the Shafi'i school because the thing that you need to smack is soil. It has to be dirt. Okay, this is a condition. So if the thing that you're hitting is not soil, then the act that you intend to do will not be a tayammum. Number 2, the second condition of tayammum says this earth must be pure. What does that mean? It means the soil that you're going to smack in order to make your tayammum, this soil must be pure, meaning it's not contaminated with any kind of najis filth. Now, we already went through the list of things that are najis. So the soil has to be the case that there's no urine on it or no blood on it or any of the other things from the list of things that are najis. Okay, the soil must be free from contamination with any type of najis, even if it's light najis. Okay, even if it's light najis. Number 3, the soil that you use must not be used soil. Okay, if you remember way back in chapter 1, we were talking about water and the types of water. And we introduced the concept of water that's been used. Okay, water that has already been used to perform some type of obligatory purification, like wudu or ghusl or cleaning najasa or istinja. Like these water that's been used for these things, that water is considered used. And so you cannot use it to perform purification again. Okay, that water is what we call pure, but not purifying. For soil, in the case of tayammum, there's a similar ruling. Okay, the dust that has been used for tayammum cannot be used again. Okay, so in tayammum, you're going to smack the ground, you're going to wipe your face, you're going to smack the ground again, you're going to wipe your right hand up to the elbow and your left hand up to the elbow. That's how you make a tayammum in brief form. Any soil or dust that remains on your body after you've made tayammum, that soil or dust is considered to be used. You can't use that soil again. Similarly, anything that fell off of your body as you were making the tayammum or after you made the tayammum, any soil or dust that fell off of your body also is considered to be used. So if you were to gather together the soil and dust that fell off your body or remained on your body, if you were to gather it together and then try to make another tayammum with that same soil or that same dust later, it would not be valid because that soil and that dust are used. Okay, this does not mean, though, that you have to smack a different place every time you make tayammum. Okay, as long as the soil, the little patch of soil that you have, as long as it's pure, you can smack it. You smack it twice in order to make tayammum. You can smack it twice and make your tayammum, and your tayammum will be valid. And as long as nothing fell off of your body back onto that spot, well, then the next time you need to make tayammum, you can go back to that same spot and you can smack it again. When we say it can't be used, we don't mean you can't smack the exact same place more than once. That's not what we're saying. We're saying what's on your body or came off of your body after your tayammum, that is what's used, not the place on the ground that you smacked. Okay? All right. That's 1, 2, and 3. Number 4, it says that the soil cannot be mixed with flour or the like. So sometimes if you get a patch of soil, it has like man-made things mixed in with it. It might have bits of flour in there, or it might have very fine rocks, like rocks that have been crushed. It might have small, fine rocks or pebbles in there. Um, it may have, well, fine rocks and pebbles aren't really the issue. Like I'm talking like man-made things, so like flour or like gypsum, you know, like plaster, like brick, pieces of brick. These kind of things, if they're mixed in with the soil, then that soil is not appropriate to be used for tayammum. You need to smack soil that's just soil. Okay, if there's little pebbles in there, that's okay. As long as you're smacking the soil and you're getting dust on your hands after smacking the soil, then it's enough. Even if there are some rocks there, but still it needs to be soil that you're smacking. As for flour, if you got, some, bread flour or something like that mixed in with the soil, then you can't use it for tayammum, even if it's only a small amount of flour mixed in. You can't use it for tayammum. Number 5, it says that one intends it. What do we mean that one intends it? It means that you went out and got the soil so that you could make your tayammum. All right, you sought it out and you got it and you smacked it. That's what's meant by intending the soil. Okay, and then he gives an example. For if the wind blew it on and one rubs it, it doesn't count. Okay, so let's say you're in a place like in the Arabian Peninsula where sometimes you get these dust storms, right? If the wind is just blowing dust around and you need to make a tayammum, so you just put your head out the window and let the dust blow on your face, and maybe you rubbed it around to make sure it got everywhere. And then you did the same thing for your hands. You put your hands out the window so the dust got all over it and you rubbed it around. This would not count as a tayammum because you didn't go get the dust. You didn't go get the soil. Rather, the soil came to you. The wind blew it on you. Okay, so that's not going to be a valid tayammum. Okay, that's not going to be a valid tayammum because the soil wasn't put, it's not you that got the soil and moved it to your face and moved it to your hands. Rather, the wind did that. And so that's something that will invalidate your tayammum. Number 6, that one wipes one's face and arms with 2 strikes. Okay, the wiping of the face and the wiping of the arms, these are obligations of tayammum. We're going to talk about that in the next chapter. But the fact that you have to use 2 strikes is what this particular one is talking about. What number is this? Number 6. Okay, what number 6 in this list is focusing on is the fact that you have to strike the earth 2 times. Okay, so when you make your tayammum, the normal way to do it is you take your hands, you slap the earth, and you wipe your face. Okay, you wipe your entire face. Then you slap the earth again, and you wipe your right hand using your left hand, and you wipe your left hand using your right hand. Okay, that's normally how tayammum is done. So how many times did you slap the earth? 2 times. Once for your face and once for your hands. Okay, but it doesn't have to necessarily be that way. It's possible for a person to slap the ground 1 time and then using his right hand, wipe his entire face. And since his left hand still has dust on it, he can use his left hand to wipe his right hand. And he did all of that with only 1 strike. But then he's going to have to strike a second time in order to do the left hand, which hasn't been wiped yet. This is also valid. Okay, when we say you have to strike the ground 2 times, we don't mean the first time is for the face and the second time is for your 2 hands. No, what we're saying is You're going to have to wipe your face, and you're going to have to wipe both hands up to the elbows, and you're going to have to use a minimum of 2 strikes of the earth to do so. All right, so what we're saying here is it's not valid if a person, for example, took a towel and smacked the ground with the towel just one time, and now the towel has dust on it. So with one end of the towel, he does his face, and with the middle of the towel, he does this arm, and with the other end of the towel, he does this arm. So he was able to wipe everything with only one smack of the earth. If a person did that, we would say your tayammum is not valid. Even though he smacked the earth and even though he got enough dust and was able to wipe every place that needs to be wiped, the fact is he only smacked the earth one time, which means the condition has not been met. In order for the tayammum to be valid, you must strike the earth 2 times. And again, normally that means with the first strike, you do your face, and with the second strike, you do your arms. Okay? But it would still be valid if with the first strike, you did your face and one arm, and then with the second strike, you just did the other arm. That would still be valid. The 2 strikes don't mean one for face and one for hands. It means you're going to have to wipe your face and your hands using at least 2 strikes. Using 1 strike is insufficient. Number 7, that one removes any impurity first. By impurity here, it means najasa. Okay, so among the conditions of tayammum is that you remove any najasa that's on your body before you make tayammum. Okay, so if you're in a situation where you don't have sufficient water to make your to make a wudu, but maybe you have a little bit of water, and say you have like, I don't know, a drop of urine that landed on your leg. In that case, you use that little bit of water to remove the urine, because your tayammum will not be valid if you have najasa on your body or on your clothes. Like one of the conditions of tayammum, one of the things that must be true before you make your tayammum is that any najasa on your body or clothes has already been cleaned. Okay? So if you have najasa on your body and you're not able to clean it, say you don't have any water at all, so you can't clean the najasa, in that case, you are what we call the person lacking both purifications. Okay, meaning you lack the ability to do wudu because of your lack of water, and you lack the ability to make tayammum because you haven't removed the najasa. This is a special case that we'll talk about at the end of the tayammum section, insha'Allah ta'ala. Number 8, that one exerts judgment as to the qibla prior to it. Okay, what he means by that is one exerts effort in order to determine which direction the qibla is. And he does that before he makes his tayammum. Okay, so according to the strongest opinion, your tayammum is not valid unless you have already done the work of figuring out which direction you need to face when you pray before the tayammum. Okay, so you have to do that first and the tayammum afterwards. And as always, if you have questions, you can type the question in the box, insha'Allah ta'ala. I'll respond if I know the answer. Number 9, that it happens after the entry of the time. What does that mean? It means your tayammum, in order for it to be valid, you have to wait until the time of the salat that you're going to pray before you make the tayammum. So if you want to pray dhuhr, for example, you don't go ahead and make your tayammum before dhuhr time comes in. If you do that, you will not be able to pray dhuhr with that tayammum. Okay, the condition of tayammum is that you wait until the time is in for your salat, and then you make your tayammum. If you make your tayammum before the time is in, then this is not a valid tayammum. Okay, by now we should know the times of the 5 salats and when they come in, not from this book because we haven't gotten that far in this book yet, but from past books that we've studied, such as the 7 hadith, you know the times when each salat comes in. So you need to wait until after the salat time is in before you make your tayammum. If a person is unable to make wudu and in a situation where they need to make tayammum, salat might not be the only reason why they're making tayammum. Okay, a person might want to make tayammum in order to do like a janazah salat. You know, janazah is not one of the 5 daily obligatory salats, but still, if a person needs to pray a janazah and he's in a situation where he needs to make tayammum, then this means also he cannot do tayammum until the time for the janazah prayer has come in. And when is the time for the janazah prayer? After the body has been washed. Okay, the body needs to be washed before you can perform a janazah salat for that dead Muslim. Okay, so because the time for the salat doesn't enter until after the body is washed, it means you can't do a tayammum for that janazah salat until after the body has been washed. Number 10, that one does tayammum for every, he says, set obligation. What he means by set obligation here is personal obligation. So scratch out the word set and write personal. Okay, you should know that the obligations in the Sharia fall into 2 categories. There are personal obligations and there are communal obligations. A personal obligation is an obligation that's upon you individually. No one else can do it for you. It has to be you. Okay, an example of a personal obligation is like the 5 daily salats. It's an obligation upon each individual Muslim to perform those salats. No one else can do it for you. You have to do it for yourself because that obligation came upon your person, came upon you. Your body is the body that's obligated to perform that salat. No one else can do it for you. These types of obligations are called personal obligations. They include things like the 5 obligatory salats. They include things like paying the zakat upon your livestock or upon your crops, for example. They include things like fasting in Ramadan and making Hajj if you're able. These things are personal obligations. So you are the one that has to perform it. But there's another category of obligations called communal obligations. What that means is that the community has to perform that obligation. Not that each person in the community has to do it, but that someone from the community needs to step up and make sure that obligation is taken care of. Okay, and as long as some people in the community do it, then the others don't have to do it. Okay, an example of a communal obligation would be like caring for the dead. If a Muslim dies, it's the community that's obligated to wash that Muslim, shroud that Muslim, perform a janazah for that Muslim, and bury that Muslim. Okay? As long as some people in the community take care of those things, then the rest of the community does not have to. But if no one does these things, then the whole community is sinful. Okay, this is what's meant by a communal obligation. So the janazah salat is an example of what? It's an example of a communal obligation. The Dhuhr prayer is an example of a personal obligation. And what he's saying here for number 10 is that for every personal obligation that requires purification, you need to make a new tayammum. Okay, you need to make a new tayammum for every personal obligation. So what you should understand from that is if Dhuhr time comes in and you've searched for the water after Dhuhr came in and you've determined which way to face for the Qibla and you've removed the najasa from your body, you've fulfilled all of these conditions we talked about, then in that case, you can make your tayammum with the intention of being permitted to pray dhuhr in your current state. And because your intention was to perform a personal obligation, then you will also be permitted to perform that which is less than a personal obligation, including a communal obligation and including also optional things like sunnah salats. You're able to do all of those things with just one tayammum. You're able to do all of those things with just one tayammum. Okay? But the minute Asr time comes in and now you have to do Asr, it requires a new tayammum because you cannot pray two personal obligations with the same tayammum. Are we clear? Inshallah, that's clear. Are there any questions about this chapter? Conditions of tayammum. Okay. Well, then let's go to the next section, which deals with how to perform tayammum. The title is Obligations of Tayammum. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said, the obligations of tayammum are 5. He's saying there are 5 things you must actually do while in the act of performing tayammum in order for your tayammum to be valid. If you leave out any one of these 5 things, then your action is not a tayammum. Okay, if you leave out any of these 5 things, then you didn't make tayammum. You don't have a valid tayammum. It doesn't count if you leave out one of these 5 things. What are the 5 things you must do for your tayammum to count? Number 1, transfer. What that means is you have to transfer the dust from the soil which you smacked to your face. Okay, you're going to smack the ground, because we already talked about one of the conditions is that you have to smack the ground twice, or smack the soil twice rather, because the soil is not necessarily on the ground. Okay, it's possible if you're, say, in a hospital and you need to make tayammum while you're in the hospital, it's possible for someone to just bring you a sack of soil and you smack the soil in the sack and you do your tayammum. And next time you need to make a tayammum, you slap the soil in the sack. It's not necessarily on the ground, but you need to slap the soil twice, wherever you find that soil, right? That's in the conditions. And when you smack the ground, it should kick up dust, and that dust will get on your hands. And you need to transfer the dust from the soil where it was to your face. That transfer, that moving of the dust from the soil to your face is what they mean by number 1, transfer. And that's why we were saying in the conditions, the previous chapter, that's why it's not valid if you just stick your face out into a sandstorm. Okay, that's why it's not valid for you to stick your face out into a sandstorm, because you're not the one transferring the dust to your face. Okay, someone asked, can dust be used for tayammum? All right, I'm going to say this. I'm going to try to be very clear. Tayammum is performed with dust. Dust is what you actually use for tayammum, not soil. You use dust. But the dust needs to be taken from soil. Okay, you're going to find a patch of soil. You're going to slap it with your hands. And by slapping it with your hands, the dust is going to be kicked up and it's going to get on your hands. And then you're going to take the dust, which is now on your hands, and you're going to wipe it on the places that need to be wiped. Okay, so you're using dust, but dust from the soil. We're not talking about if you haven't cleaned your furniture in a while that you can just wipe some dust off your furniture and make tayammum with it. That's not the kind of dust we're talking about. That's why you can't slap a wall or slap a chair or wipe a table or something like that and then make tayammum. None of that is valid. As we said in the previous chapter, the condition for tayammum is that it has to be with soil. Okay? And that soil needs to be dusty. Okay? That soil needs to be dusty. It needs to be dry enough that when you smack the soil, you'll get dust on your hand. All right? You can't make tayammum with wet soil. Obviously, if the soil was wet, that's a sign that water is present. So in that case, you seek the water. So the first obligation of tayammum is the transfer of the dust from the soil that you smacked to your face. The second thing, which is obligatory in tayammum, is your intention. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says the intention of making salah permissible. Please note this intention and remember it. Remember it word for word. Okay? Tayammum is not like wudu or ghusl. For wudu, there is a wide range of intentions you could make. You could intend to make wudu. You could intend to make obligatory wudu. You could intend to perform obligatory purification. You could intend to perform that which makes salat permissible. You could intend to lift minor hadath. You could, you could specify hadath, to lift the hadath of urine or the hadath of breaking wind. There's so many different intentions you can make for wudu. But for tayammum, the intention that you make is that you're intending to do tayammum in order to make salat permissible for you. Okay? Because the one who makes tayammum is someone who is currently not in a state of purification, and they're not able to enter a state of purification because they're not able to make wudu or ghusl. And so they're not in a state of purification. And ordinarily it is haram for someone who's not in a state of purification to perform salat. And if such a person performs salat, the salat is not valid. That's how the normal rule works. But tayammum is a special rule that Allah gave us for the cases where we cannot make wudu or ghusl. And when you're in that situation, you make your tayammum, and tayammum does not put you in a state of purification. All right, tayammum does not lift minor hadath the way wudu does, and it does not lift major hadath the way ghusl does. So after your tayammum, you're still not in a state of purification. So how are you going to make salat if you're not allowed to make salat when you're not in a state of purification? This is why the intention for tayammum needs to be very specific. Your intention is that you're intending to do tayammum in order to make the salat permissible. Okay, we make tayammum so that we'll be able to pray the salat on time. Because without tayammum, we wouldn't be able to. You get it? So there's a very specific intention that you make. Okay, and it doesn't necessarily have to be for salat, but it needs to be for something that requires purification. So if you wanted to touch your mushaf, you can make a tayammum and say you're intending to make tayammum in order to make touching the mushaf permissible. Right? You can specify anything that requires a state of purification in order for you to do it. But my recommendation is to intend that you're doing it in order to perform a obligatory salat. Okay, because if you make tayammum in order to perform an obligatory salat, then all of the other things that require purification will also be permitted with the same tayammum. Let's read. Number 2. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, the intention of making salah permissible. And it must coincide with striking, and it must continue till wiping one's face. Okay, so the author of this book, may Allah have mercy on him, he says that this intention that you're doing tayammum in order to make the obligatory salat permissible, this intention, according to what's in the book, needs to be present at the time that you slap the ground for the first time. And the intention needs to stay at the top of your mind. It needs to stay in your heart the entire time that you're transferring the dust from the ground all the way up until you start wiping it on your face. This is what he says in the book, and this is a strong opinion. But the strongest opinion in the madhab is that you don't necessarily have to hold the intention while you're moving your hands, but rather it's enough that the intention was there in the heart at the moment you slapped the ground, and also there in the heart at the moment you wiped your face. Okay, as long as the intention is present in the heart at the time of slapping and at the time of wiping, that it would not harm you if, the intention, briefly went away and came back while you were moving your hands in between slapping the ground and wiping your face. Okay, that, brief distraction moment would not render your tayammum invalid according to the strongest opinion. What matters is that the intention was present in two places: at the time of the first slapping of the ground and at the time that you began wiping your face. But of course, it's better if you maintain the intention also while moving your hands from the ground to your face. He says, if one intends with one's tayammum to make the obligatory salat permissible, then one can pray the obligatory and the supererogatory, meaning the optional, the sunnah salats. So, for example, if it's dhuhr time and you make your intention that you're doing tayammum to make the obligatory dhuhr salat permissible, then with that one tayammum, you would be allowed to pray as many sunnahs as you want before dhuhr. You'd be able to pray dhuhr, and you'd be able to continue to pray as many sunnahs as you want after dhuhr. And you'd be able to touch a mushaf, and you'd be able to recite Quran, and you would be able to do any of the things that require purification. That one tayammum would be sufficient for all of that. Okay? As long as you don't perform another personal obligation, because you would need a second tayammum in order to do that. So imagine if you're traveling and dhuhr time comes in and you stop. And because you're traveling, you want to combine salats. You want to pray dhuhr and asr one behind the other during dhuhr time. How can you do that with tayammum? Well, you would wait for dhuhr to come in. And after the time comes in, you would look for the water. And if you determine that water is not available, you would clean any najasa off of your body. You would cover up your awrah. You would determine the direction of the qibla. Okay? And then you would make your tayammum in order to pray dhuhr. And after you finish dhuhr, as long as you still remember the direction of the qibla, you would make another tayammum in order to pray asr. But you would not be able to pray dhuhr and asr with the same tayammum, because one tayammum is only sufficient for one personal obligation. Let's keep reading what the author says. May Allah have mercy upon him. He says, yet, if one intends to make the supererogatory permissible, or merely salah, or funeral salah, then that person cannot pray with this tayammum, the obligatory. Okay, so if in your intention, when you made your tayammum, you did not intend to make the obligatory salat permissible for you, rather you simply intended to make salat permissible for you, then this means you can pray sunnah salats, but you cannot pray the obligatory salat with it. Or if in your intention you intended that you're doing tayammum in order to make sunnah salats permissible for you, then you can pray as many sunnah salats as you want, but you cannot pray an obligatory salat with that tayammum. Or if you made tayammum in order to do a janazah salat, you can do the janazah salat with it, even multiple janazah salats with it, but you cannot do a personally obligatory salat with it. You understand? There's like ranks to these actions. In order to do a personal obligation, you have to intend that this tayammum is to make a personal obligation permissible. Otherwise, the personal obligations are not going to be permissible with that tayammum. Number 3, the third thing you must do for your tayammum to be valid, it says the wiping of one's face. So we already talked during the wudu chapter about the dimensions of the face, right? The borders of the face, lengthwise, is that the face begins at the normal hairline, the place where normal people's hairline is, not necessarily the place where your hairline currently is, but the place where a normal person's hairline is, until the bottom of their chin. This is the lengthwise boundaries of the face. And the widthwise boundaries of the face are that the face is everything between the ears. So that little piece of the ear that sticks out, this little peg sticking out, is not part of your face because that's part of your ear. But everything that's between this peg and this peg is part of your face, including this little strip of skin that's between the sideburns and that peg. That's part of your face that you have to make sure you wipe. And I will also caution you to be very careful when you make tayammum to make sure you wipe everywhere. Tayammum is different than wudu. That's because dust doesn't move by itself. Okay, water, when you're making wudu, water moves on its own. In fact, you have to use enough water that the water will flow on your face. So when you're making wudu and you put water on your face, the water is usually flowing ahead of your hands. And then you're moving your hands to kind of steer the water in the direction you want it to go. But the water, to a certain extent, is already moving on its own and flowing over places that you may not have necessarily wiped with your own hand. But as long as the water flowed everywhere, well, then your wudu is valid. Okay? So in wudu, it's possible for your wudu to be valid even if you didn't physically wipe every single part of your face. Okay, because the water is flowing by itself, and the water may have flowed over a certain part of your face, even if your finger didn't rub that part of your face. But for tayammum, that's not going to happen. The dust is on your fingers, and it doesn't flow. It doesn't go around by itself. So you have to make sure you wipe every single part of your face, every little crevice around your eyes and in the corners and around the bits of your nose like that. You have to make sure you wipe every single place, including the red part of your lips, the part of your lips that show if your face is relaxed and your mouth is closed. That part of your lips has to be wiped, okay? You have to make sure every single bit of your face has been wiped. Okay, so you need to be very deliberate when you make tayammum, even more so than when you're making wudu. Number 4, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, said the wiping of both arms up to and including the elbows. So in tayammum, you don't just wipe the face, you also wipe the hands from the tip of the fingers up to and including the elbow. So the exact same place that you have to wash when you make wudu, that's the place that you need to wipe with dust when you make tayammum. That's the place that you have to wipe with dust when you make tayammum. And again, make sure the dust went everywhere. The 5th and final thing that you have to do for your tayammum to count, it says the order between the 2 wipes. What does that mean? It means that you have to wipe your face before you wipe your hands. Okay, when it says the 2 wipes, it's not talking about the 2 strikes on the ground. He's saying the 2 wipes. You wipe your face, that's one wipe. Then you wipe your hands. That's the second wipe. The wiping of the face needs to be completed before you start wiping your hands. Okay, and once you've wiped both arms from the tips of the fingers up to and including the elbow, then your tayammum is complete. MashaAllah. Now, there's a way that the scholars describe for making tayammum, a way that makes it very easy. And if you want to learn this way, what you do is first you slap the ground with your hands spread apart. Boom, slap the ground, and you wipe your face, which I think is pretty easy to understand. But then when it comes time to slapping the ground the second time, of course, you remove your ring for the second time. You slap the ground with your fingers spread out. Why do you slap the ground with your fingers spread out? Because when you kick up that dust, the dust is going to go between your fingers as long as your fingers are spread out when you slap the ground. So when it comes to wiping your hands, as soon as you slap the ground, the dust has already reached all of the places between your fingers already. And then what you do is you then close your fingers on your right hand and tuck your thumb in like this. Tuck your thumb in. And then with your left hand, you take just the fingers, not the palm, just the fingers, and you put the fingers on the back of your right hand like this. So the tips of the fingers are sticking out. Okay, you want the tips of your left hand, the tips of the fingers sticking out, and you want the back of your right hand sitting just between the palm and the tips of those fingers. And then what you're going to do is you're going to wipe with the tips of those fingers the back of your right hand. Okay, you're going to wipe the back of the right hand until you get to here where the thumb is. Then you're going to take the tips of those fingers and put it up against your hand so that you can continue wiping from there. No. You put the fingers in when you get to the wrist. This is when you put your fingers, the fingertips, you put it there when you get to the wrist, and then you can just wipe like that down until you get to, you wipe like that, put the fingers in, down until you get to your elbow. Okay, and this whole time, I'm keeping my palm away from my arm. So I'm wiping only with the fingers. You start like this, you wipe down, you put your tips here, and you keep wiping with just the fingers until you get down to the elbow. Then what you're going to do is you're going to rotate your arm so that the part of your arm that hasn't been wiped yet is now going to be on top of the palm of your hand. And you're going to trace the palm of your hand back up towards your hand, keeping your thumb away. Keeping your thumb away. So with the palm, you'll wipe the rest of your hand. And then once you get to your wrist, you put your thumb down and you'll wipe with your thumb over the last remaining part of the hand that hasn't been wiped. So with the fingers, you're going to wipe the back of the hand, the side, and hairy part of the forearm, all the way down to the elbow. And then you're going to roll your arm over and you're going to get the less hairy part of your forearm with your palm until you get to the wrist. Then you're going to put your thumb down and get the last bit of the hand that hadn't been wiped, which would be the part that the part that you tucked inside in the beginning is the one part that hasn't been wiped yet. You're going to get to that at the very end when you do this. And it's very quick. All right, once you know how to do it, you just kind of start like this, and then you just go, and you did one hand. Okay, you've wiped everywhere. All right, the only place you didn't wipe when you did that is between the fingers, and you got that when you smacked the ground because your fingers were spread out. Okay, and then you just do the same thing with the other hand. You start like this, you go in, you turn, you go out, and boom, you've made your tayammum. All right, this is the easy way to do it. And again, if you can just remember the start position, then you should be able to remember everything else. This is how one performs the tayammum. Any questions about that? Somebody asks, if you miss Dhuhr Salat, Asr time comes in and you didn't pray Dhuhr, can you pray Asr first and then pray Dhuhr? The answer to that question, sister, depends on why you missed Dhuhr. If you had an excuse for missing Dhuhr, like for example, if you were traveling and you intended to delay Dhuhr until Asr time, or if you simply forgot, like it completely left your mind that you needed to pray and you didn't remember until after Asr came in, that would be an excuse. Or if you were asleep, say you fell asleep before Dhuhr time and when you woke up, it was Asr time. These are cases of you having an excuse for missing Dhuhr. If you have a religiously valid excuse like this, well, then your obligation is to make up that Dhuhr Salat before you die. Okay, if you missed a Salat with an excuse, you need to make it up, and there's no particular time that you have to make it up. You just have to make it up before you die. However, if you missed a Salat without a religiously valid excuse, well, then your obligation is to make it up immediately, without delay. So what that means then is if you did not have an excuse for missing Dhuhr, you pray your Dhuhr before you pray your Asr. Unless the situation is such that that if you pray Dhuhr first, well, then you're going to end up praying Asr outside of its time. Like say it's very, very near to the end of Asr. There's only 5 minutes left in Asr time, and it's going to take you 4.5 minutes to pray Dhuhr. So you don't have enough time to pray Dhuhr and Asr within Asr time. If you're at that point, then you pray Asr first in order to ensure you pray it within its time, and you pray Dhuhr after. But if you miss Dhuhr without an excuse, you need to pray Dhuhr immediately if able. And the case where you're not able would be the case where there isn't sufficient time to pray Dhuhr and Asr in Asr time. In that case, you do Asr first. Any other questions? Then let's read through these sunnahs. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, also mentioned several actions that are sunnah to do in your tayammum. Okay, these things are not required for your tayammum to be valid, but if you do these things, your tayammum will be done in a more perfect way, and your reward will be greater, insha'Allah ta'ala. It says, its recommended acts are, number 1, the naming. Okay, what that means is to mention the name of Allah. Okay, so it's sunnah to say Bismillah at the start of your tayammum. Like when you slap the ground, it's sunnah to say Bismillah. And what's better than saying Bismillah would be to say the full Basmalah. To say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That would be even better. But as long as you simply say Bismillah, then you at least, that much is sufficient for you to get the reward of doing the sunnah. Number 2, to begin with the right. Okay, so this works exactly like it works in wudu. Okay, if you're able to do both sides of your face at the same time, then you should do both sides of your face at the same time. But if you're wiping a body part where it's difficult to do both at the same time, like say your hands, then in that case, you should begin with the right hand. You should wipe your right hand before you wipe your left hand. Okay, this is a sunnah of tayammum. For number 3, I'm going to change the translation the guy wrote. He said to wipe the utmost of the face, but what it should say is, and the top of the face. And the top of the face. What he means by that is, just like it's sunnah to begin with the right before the left, it's also sunnah to begin with the top of the face before the bottom of the face. Again, this is just like wudu. In wudu, when you wash, you want to start with the top of your face and then wash downwards. Similarly, in tayammum, when you wipe your face, you want to start with the top of your face and wipe downwards. Number 4, to reduce the dust. Okay, one of the sunnahs of tayammum is to knock some of the dust off your hands before you wipe. So when you slap the ground, you're going to get a certain amount of dust on your hands, which is probably more than you need. So the sunnah then is to sort of like knock your hands together to get some of the dust to fall off of your hand before you wipe. This is one of the sunnahs of tayammum. Number 5 is succession. By succession, what does he mean? By succession, he means that you don't waste time in between wiping the face and wiping the hands. So after you've wiped the face, you're allowed to take time between them if you want, but the sunnah is that you then wipe the hands quickly after finishing wiping the face. Right? You get the reward for this sunnah as long as the amount of time between finishing the face and wiping the hand is short enough that if you had wiped your face, if you had washed your face with water, your face would not have dried by the time you started wiping your arms. Okay, that's what's meant by succession. You didn't leave a gap so big that your face would have dried had you used water and the circumstances were average circumstances. You know, average temperature, average wind, average sunlight, average, mood of the person, and so forth. That's what's meant by succession. You don't waste a lot of time. Number 6, to separate the fingers when striking. So one of the sunnahs of tayammum is that when you strike the ground, you don't strike the ground with your hands like this, fingers together. No, you want to separate your fingers when you strike the ground, which will allow the dust to get between your fingers. Number 7, to remove the ring. So if you're wearing a ring like I am, it's sunnah to remove the ring in order for you to make your tayammum. Okay, so the first time you slap the ground, the first place that you're going to wipe is your face. Okay, because you don't start wiping your hands until after the face is done. So for the first slapping of the ground, it's sunnah to remove the ring and allow the dust to touch that part of the finger where the ring was. It's sunnah. Okay, but for the second strike of the earth, at this point, you're in the section of the tayammum where your job is to make sure the dust reaches everywhere on your hands up to and including the elbows. For the second strike, you're actually obligated to remove your ring. So it's not a sunnah at that point. Okay, if you haven't removed your ring before the second strike, you're now obligated to remove the ring for the second strike so that the dust can reach that part of your hand. Okay, so when he says sunnah to remove the ring, what he means is it's sunnah to do it for the first strike. But it's obligatory for the second strike if you haven't done it yet by that time. I'll read what it says on the page. It says to remove the ring, it is compulsory to remove it in the second strike. Again, if something's not clear, please do drop a question in the comment box. Number 8, to pass the hand over the limb. What that means is, among the sunnahs of tayammum, is to actually wipe with your hands over all of the places that need to be wiped, using your hands, meaning using the skin of your hand. Okay, tayammum would be permissible if you used a rag to do it, but the sunnah is to wipe with your hand. Okay, that is the sunnah. And the next one in the list, he says to wipe the upper arm. So among the sunnahs of tayammum is when you're wiping your arms, of course, you're obligated to go up to and including the elbow. But the sunnah is to go beyond the elbow and actually wipe the upper part of your arm, the bicep and tricep area. This is a sunnah of tayammum, just as it is in wudu. Number 10, among the sunnahs of tayammum is not to repeat. Okay, what does that mean, not to repeat? It means that unlike wudu, in tayammum you do everything once. In wudu, the sunnah is to do everything 3 times, right? You wash your face 3 times. You wash your right hand 3 times. You wash your left hand 3 times. You wash your feet 3 times. And in fact, in the Shafi'i school, you do every part of the wudu 3 times, including the test saying Bismillah in the beginning, including washing your hands, including rinsing your mouth, including rinsing your nose, everything, wiping your head, wiping your ears, putting your fingers in the beard, putting your fingers like this, putting your fingers in your feet. Everything is done 3 times in wudu, according to the Shafi'i school. But for tayammum, the sunnah is to do everything 1 time. You don't repeat. You don't do it a 2nd time and a 3rd time. Not for tayammum. Number 11, to face the qibla. Okay, so among the sunnahs of tayammum is to be facing the qibla when you make tayammum, which is the same as wudu. It's also sunnah to face the qibla when you make wudu. And the last sunnah that's mentioned here is to say the 2 shahadas after it. Okay, so after a person completes the tayammum, it's sunnah to say the 2 shahadas afterwards, which, by the way, is also sunnah after making wudu. Okay, after wudu, you say the full dua, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh, Allahumma ij'alni min at-tawwabin, wa ij'alni min al-mutatahhirin, subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. That's the dua which is sunnah to say at the end of the wudu. And I did not hear that after tayammum you would say anything different. So when it says here to say the 2 shahadas, what I understand from it is say that whole dua, that's sunnah to say after the wudu. And lastly, he says a very important sentence to make sure we all take note of. Whoever cannot find water nor earth prays the obligatory only and repeats with water. What does that mean? It means if you're in a situation where you cannot enter a state of purity by means of wudu or ghusl because you lack water, what do you do in that case? In that case, you resort to tayammum out of necessity. But tayammum requires soil. It requires earth. What if you don't have access to earth either? What if you're in a place where there's no earth for you to smack and there's no water for you to use? Then what do you do? Okay, this happens sometimes for people in prison where they're trapped in their cell. They don't have any water in there. The prayer time comes in and they still don't have water and they don't have any soil to smack. So what can they do? They can't do anything. So what's the ruling of the madhab in this case? In this case, you pray the salat within its time because the salat time is sacred and you don't ever let the salat time go out without performing salat in it. So even though you don't have wudu and you don't have ghusl and you weren't even able to make tayammum, you still make the salat. Because there's never any excuse for the Muslim to let the salat time go out without praying. However, because you prayed that salat without being in a state of purity, without even tayammum, which would permit you to pray it without being in a state of purity, you didn't have either of those. So what do you have to do? Once water is available and you're able to make that ghusl or make that wudu, you need to repeat all of the prayers. Excuse me. You need to repeat all of the prayers that you prayed while in that state where you didn't have any kind of purification. Not wudu, not ghusl, and not even tayammum. Okay, this type of person, there's a name for them in the Shafi'i school. It's called the one who lacks the 2 purifiers. Okay, meaning he lacks water and he lacks soil. He lacks water and he lacks soil. So he can't do anything to purify himself. He can't use water, which would truly lift the hadath from his body and truly put him in a state of purity. And he can't use soil, which does not lift hadath from your body, but at least makes it permissible for you to pray your salat. He doesn't have either one of these. So what does he do? He prays out of respect for the sacredness of the salat time. But then once he has access to water and he's in a proper and true state of purity, he repeats the salats that he prayed while he had neither wudu nor tayammum. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. I regret to inform you that this class is going to go on hiatus for the month of Ramadan. Obviously, I would like to continue because teaching is something that is necessary and something that I enjoy. And to teach in Ramadan is even better than to teach at other times of the year. However, just the time of the class doesn't work for me. 7:30 p.m. is going to be nighttime. And during Ramadan, during the nighttime, we are very busy. Between having our iftar meal and the other events of the night, I usually like to give daily classes. Then there's Isha prayer, there's Taraweeh, there's Witr, there's a number of things that we do during the nighttime. We're basically too busy to have the class online. So the next time we will resume the book will be after the Eid, insha'Allah ta'ala, and we'll pick up right where we left off with the chapter pertaining to blood, where we're going to talk about the various bloods that might come out of a woman's private area. And what are the rules for those bloods? And how do you recognize one kind of blood from the other? And what do you do depending on, which type of blood is coming out? We'll discuss that. That's the last chapter in the book of purification. After that, we will move on, insha'Allah ta'ala, to the book of salat, where we will start talking about the rules of the salat. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. I think I answered all the questions in the comment boxes already, but allow me to look in case I missed one. All right. Well, I think I've answered all the questions. So let's say La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Rabbi ighfir li wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. Rabbi ighfir li wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. Rabbi ighfir li wa lil mu'minina wal mu'minat. Barakallahu feekum. I'll see you after the Eid, insha'Allah ta'ala. May Allah grant all of you a blessed and transformative Ramadan, insha'Allah ta'ala. May Allah cause all of us to enter into the month in one state and exit out of the month in a higher state, insha'Allah ta'ala. And may Allah grant us all success, grant us sincere and valid deeds during the month. And may Allah grant us success in this dunya and grant us success on the day of judgment and admit us all into the paradise without any torture. Ameen, ameen, ameen. So I'll see you in about a month. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.